This is the Iron Sharpens Iron movement, sharing insights into the power of people-centric leading.
Hi, this is Jim, and today we welcome to our tribe a renowned psychologist and coach that reminds us that mindfulness is a foundational skill for self-awareness and growth, which can help you, your leadership, and your organization. She focuses on mindfulness, unconscious bias, deep listening, and the power of narrative in healing. She maintains empathy and compassion as some of the most powerful tools that you should embrace as a leader. This is Sharee Johnson. Iron Sharpens Iron movement is brought to you by N2 Growth, a leader in executive search, leadership development, and talent management. We find and develop the world's best leaders. Learn more about our practice by visiting us at n2growth.com or click on the link in the show notes of this podcast. Sharee, welcome to the Iron Sharpens Iron movement. We are so happy to have you here today. I personally have been waiting for us to have this conversation. I know that it's an interesting dynamic for all of you listening. Sharee is in Australia, and of course, here I'm broadcasting out of Central Vermont. So finding the right time to do all this stuff is a bit of a stretch, and we certainly are happy to have you here. Welcome to the Iron Sharpens Iron movement.
Thank you very much, Jim. It's absolutely a pleasure to be here. Great way for me to start my day.
Oh, that's awesome. And you were just explaining to me in the green room, you've got a beautiful pink sky, sunrise coming up right now. And I'm sitting here looking at the sunset. It's pretty interesting. Matter of fact, you're on a Thursday and I'm on a Wednesday. Is that correct?
Yep, that's right. We've got to really concentrate, don't we?
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. Well, I tell you, one of the things that has intrigued me from the moment that I was introduced to you was your work in the world of mindfulness. This audience here, I think, is very thirsty to keep finding out how to make themselves better. And something that you wrote caught my eye, and it's the very first thing that I wish to talk to you about. And you once said that transformational change depends on the mind. And I'd love to know what made you write that.
Wow. What specifically helped me write that, I'm not sure, Jim, but I think that everything comes back to our mind and starts with our mind. So the way we talk to ourselves, the things we notice, all of those things are directed by our mind. Our mind is very selective about what it attends to, and so for transformation to happen, we really need to be actively intending something. If we're just on autopilot, if we're just behaving habitually based on how we grew up or the culture we're immersed in, then it's an automatic autopilot kind of behavior. It's mindless in the sense that our brain is still directing what we're paying attention to, but we're not active in that process. So to my mind, for my thinking about transformation requires some intentional action. And one of the ways that we can really start to cultivate difference or different perspective or other ideas or new understandings is to attend to our mind, to train our mind in the same way as we would train our body in the gym. And of course, going to the gym and having the trainer explain to us how to do the exercise is nothing like doing the exercise, right?
That's right.
So mindfulness practice requires us to do something, and we can talk about formal mindful practice where we sit, and meditation is one form of mindful practice. And we can talk about informal mindfulness where we would be attending very intentionally to that which we're doing. And sometimes people talk about flow in this state, that we're in flow. And there'd be some argument to make that when we're in flow, we're not necessarily mindful, because when we're in flow, we're often doing things that are practiced and automatic. So we want to think about mindfulness as a very intentional act. We're training our attention, we're training our awareness, we're opening up our awareness. So the qualities are things like really accepting, being curious, being present. Patience is one of my favorite qualities of mindfulness, where we're able to sit and watch and wait and feel, notice everything that's here, not just the the things we'd like to be here, but all of the things that might be here in our experience.
Have you found that most people are on autopilot? I mean, the vast majority of people?
Well, our world is moving so fast, isn't it? I think, yes, we're all on autopilot a lot of the time. And the research says that about 40% of our brain's activity is automated and habitual. And we need that. Our brains are not very big. The equivalent of, two fists is about the size of your brain or our brain, everybody's brain. So I think that, this machine is a really incredible, powerful machine if you think of our brain in that way. And there's so much data and so much stimulation coming in all of the time that it really needs a way of streamlining some of the things that we do. And so we really want a lot of automated behaviors. In fact, I don't want to go into the kitchen every morning to make breakfast and have to decipher every tiny little bit of, what is this room? Where are the things in this room? What do I do here?
So
Imagine
true.
if life was like that every day, all day. Exhausting. We'd never get out of the kitchen. We'd still be there having breakfast at the end of the day. So mindfulness really is helping us to make some conscious choice about what we want to pay attention to.
So, a lot of things in the realm of mindfulness, and I'm going to be very general here. A lot of people, when I talk to them about the importance of mindfulness, they're just like, oh, that's just an ancient practice. That's voodoo. That's just things that aren't based on any science at all. And I'd love to know through your expertise, especially in the world of neuroscience and how advanced it has become in the last few years, to where that's starting to debunk the myths that even though a lot of these things are ancient practices, there is science behind it about how effective it really is.
Mm. So, in terms of published scientific papers, at the end of 1996, let's say, I think there were 6 published, peer-reviewed, really rigorous papers on mindfulness. And now, I think this figures for 2017, but we're looking at something like 6 published, rigorous, peer-reviewed papers every day, 20 years on. So we have had just this explosion
Wow.
of science and research into mindfulness, and people like Richie Davidson, and there's lots of really esteemed researchers who are looking at these questions of how do we measure the impact of mindfulness on our bodies. And certainly we can measure things like levels of cortisol and how much we sweat and those kinds of physiological measures. But the functional MRI machines and some of the
Hmm.
technology we have now are letting us measure activity in our brain in new ways all of the time. And people carrying smartphones around, everybody's got a phone, so we've got this way of collecting big data to understand what people are doing and how they're feeling and what they're thinking about multiple times a day, so that we can start to measure what is the impact of people's mind wandering or mind paying attention and so on. And the functional MRI machines have been used to look at people like Matthew Ricard and people who've got 10,000 plus hours of meditation, significant life practice, to look at what's the difference between their brains and the brains of people who don't meditate or have a casual meditation practice, for instance. And so we've been able to see that, in fact, neurogenesis goes on through our life. We continue to create new brain cells. And when I was at university 30 years ago, we learned things like that our brain really is only in decaying state after about, once we're about 20 or, quite young, that
Yes.
we're not going to be, our brain is going to be shrinking rather than growing. Devastating, isn't it, when you're at
That's
university
right.
and that's what you're being
I
taught?
grew up listening to that exact mindset. That's right.
So we know now that, in fact, our brains, we keep creating new neurons, and probably more than the cortical thickening, the increased grey matter, we're noticing the changes in synaptic connections. And that's really, when we're thinking about neuroplasticity of the brain, that's probably more relevant than thinking about are we birthing new cells. We're certainly creating and recreating our brain every day. And it's very clear at the moment, and science is always evolving, that a mindful practice can change the structure and the function of our brain. That this neuroplastic brain of ours um, is built based on what we think about, what we do, and what we practice. And so, if we practice meditation for 10 minutes every morning, for instance, then we're strengthening the neurological connections for that activity. And it's easier to do over time. It becomes more readily available to us. So if you think of the highways in your brain, the neuronal connections, we're moving from having some sort of bush track where we can't find the path through the forest or through the undergrowth, to having we might have, if we practice enough, a very strong, 4-lane highway where the connections between our prefrontal cortex, that decision-making part of our brain, and our limbic system, which is controlling our memory and our emotions and our alarm centers reacting when we need to react quickly to the world. We're creating a much stronger connection between those two parts of our brain. And so our prefrontal cortex is able to modulate our alarm centers and our emotional centers that little bit more effectively.
It's amazing to me that I love having conversations with senior leaders. Doesn't matter what they do, but senior leaders in whatever industry they're in, and they're on this constant quest to be the best, and these high performing organizations, how do we become better? And you look back at the last 20 years on these classic professional developmental pyramids. You will go to this school at this time, you'll take this course, you'll get that certification. Everybody's chasing all of that, and at the end of the day, if you have two competitive organizations, they end up with these human beings that have about the same education and training and experiences. They have about the same types, but they're still trying to find out how can they get the edge. And it's so frustrating to me that it's right in front of them. The answer is right in front of them the whole time, and it's about taking care of themselves. It isn't about getting that extra MBA. It's about taking care of you.
Yeah, it's a really big challenge, Jim, isn't it? Because culturally, in the West at least, we're very busy doing. And even though I have a long mindful practice and teach mindfulness, it's so enticing to be busy. I read a lot. I read a book a week. I'm a voracious learner in that style of reading of reading a book. Um, and sometimes I have to remind myself that I don't have to read another book. It'll be okay if I just sit quietly, or if I have a conversation with someone, or if I spend some time processing. And maybe it's better, instead of reading the next book, maybe it's better to go walking every day this week and really process what I've just read. So and deepen our experience. But our culture, our environment is fast, and it's inviting us. There's invitations all day long to the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And that competition, I think, is really fierce. That's a reality of a young professional's life, isn't it?
It sure is. Absolutely. And it's, hopefully, my hope is, for the exposure to people like you that allow us to, just by even listening to the tone of your voice in this interview, slows us down. We need kind of that extra person, that wingman, to put the hand on the shoulder and just say, slow down, have patience. You talked earlier that you said one of your most favorite things to talk about is patience.
Mm,
And really, at least from my point of view, there are very few people that I know at the senior executive level that have patience. They
mm.
may say they have patience, but not true patience, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. It's very hard to see ourselves, isn't it? And that's the value of coaching, to my mind, and maybe a really good mentor too. That, or those sort of some peer programs have this too, where we have enough trust. The trust is high, and so we're able to hear that message. It's for somebody who we don't trust, or we're suspicious of, or we're in competition with. It's very hard to take that message of slow down, or be patient, or wait. But if we can surround ourselves, have enough people around us who um, we regard highly, I think one of the most powerful things that I can call somebody else is a teacher. I think that's
Mm.
incredibly valuable as an adult. If another adult refers to me as a teacher, I think, wow, what a privilege that is. That's a really powerful statement to call me a teacher. And so I think that having those people around you that you can think of as your teachers, who you're willing to listen to, who you're open to their feedback, you're curious about what it is that they've got to share. That's the work of that's the work of insight in a way. That's a way of trying to find insight. And while we stay in automated, fast, competitive places, uh, you know, we're not in a learning culture, to my mind. The place of learning is the place of listening, of respect, of trust. That's where we learn. Is we can't learn in an emotionally fraught mindset.
So true. And I have to admit, I wrote that down because, some words are very powerful. And when you really bring to this point about, there are some definitional differences between a mentor
Mm,
and a coach,
mm,
and then that significant leap to teacher. That's powerful.
mm.
That's really powerful. That word is powerful when it's placed in that context, for sure. It's interesting. Like, even if if I'm talking to fellow coaches, or if I'm coaching someone and encouraging that one to be a servant leader or a steward of leadership, and encouraging them to potentially coach others. I gotta admit, I think I'm going to start now transitioning into, when I say that, to then push them even harder to somehow find that way to get that ultimate kind of uh, you know accolade of being called a teacher. I think that's pretty cool. That's pretty awakening for me, for sure.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. But you're also using the word servant leadership, and I think that's another really, fantastic framework to think about this idea of service. And so many of the people I work with are in service roles anyway, but they've, we lose sight of that, and we lose sight of, why am I here in the first place? And
So true. So this is a very interesting niche that you are involved in that one of the main areas of focus that you coach on is actually for healthcare workers.
mhm.
How can you share with us, how did this journey begin, and what made you focus on kind of that very specific role of healthcare workers in
Mm,
your practice?
mm. So, as you know, I'm a psychologist first, so I'm a health. That's an easy place for me to identify. And and I've had a counselling practice for many, many years, and so I was spending a lot of time in healthcare. In my work as the provider of healthcare. And then 12 years ago, my husband got sick with cancer, and he's since passed. And that was a 4-year journey that was, pretty harrowing. But it's one of the things that happened during that process, that 4 years of Tim's cancer, was we've spent a lot of time in hospitals where we hadn't really spent a lot of time. We're blessed in both of our families with a lot of good health, and it was an incredibly steep learning curve from the perspective of, obviously there were patient and carer roles that were big learning curves too, but there was a big learning curve for me in observing and watching the people that were caring for us and the variation in that. So it made a
Mm,
huge difference to us when we were with what I now can reflect on, a well doctor, or somebody who was incredibly under pressure or stressed or fatigued, and not only the doctors, the nurses too. But the experience of this process really showed me how critical and central the doctors are. The doctors control a lot of what goes on. They're the reference point, they're the approvers, the assessors.
yeah.
They're making most of the decisions. They hold a lot of the power in the system. And so initially, in fact, I was fairly angry a lot of the time about how what I saw as the patient, or the carer of the patient, um, as poor communication and ineffective uh, care, and questions about did they actually really care. So there was a lot of
Ah.
anger and impatience and disappointment and frustration, lots of those uncomfortable emotions, and they didn't add anything to my ability to care for my husband. In fact, they're a huge energy drain and distraction. So as we worked through our processes, Tim passed away. I was looking after our 3 young kids. So there was lots of things to do in those first couple of years just for our family to be well and okay. But as that shifted and we started to find our bearings again and so on, I started to talk more with doctors, and I'm fortunate I've got a couple of family physicians in my family,
Oh, wow.
my brother and his wife. So they were great, alternative perspectives, and I think that's really important to seek out the opposite understanding, the opposite perspectives of your own. So I was asking them a lot of questions about, their training and what happens in as you move through the hierarchy of medicine and so on. And they, because they're family, they were getting the kind of really raw experience from me. And one day, my brother phoned me up, and he said he'd been with a person who had breast cancer, who the cancer had recurred, and she had said to him, "You just tell me what to do. It worked last time, and I'll do it again." And
Oh, boy.
and I had this kind of new sense of anger, the opposite anger to what I'd had before, really. So I felt really kind of outraged that she would release all of her power and her innate potential to be well and kind of put it at my brother's feet. And I felt like this is too much
Hmm.
responsibility for him. It wasn't fair for him. Interesting when it's somebody you care about how your perspective changes, Jim.
So
And so,
true. So true.
so I was feeling this is not fair for him. What happens when it goes wrong? And it'll be his fault. And I felt very protective of him. So that was a really a very watershed kind of moment. It really opened my eyes in a different way to thinking about what it's like for the doctors and who's supporting them and how are they even learning these skills. And the more I learned, the more I found out that they don't get any real formal training in terms of communication. They certainly, most of them, get nothing about leadership. They don't get very much about mindfulness, although mindfulness is in a lot of medical courses now in mostly a small way. And a lot of the doctors I've talked to, it seems like it's a bit tokenistic. I don't think the educators mean for that to happen. I think their intention is genuine and um, they are seeking to shift the way the place of mindfulness and the way medicine uses that. But at the moment, and in these first sort of 10 years, I suppose, of this trying to happen, it takes a long time for cultural change. So that really brought me to saying, okay, I'm going to bring the coaching that I'm already doing in more corporate spaces specifically to doctors and see if there are any doctors in the world who are interested in these ideas.
So, Sharee, before we go on, I just want to say how sorry we are to hear about Tim, and I hope that it very much has a feeling that his spirit is living through you to be the person that you've become and to help out so many others that are in those situations.
Thank you,
So
Jim. I
we can
think,
definitely feel that.
some of this work is definitely legacy work for sure.
That's awesome. And so as you started to get to this point where you've had this background, you already are a coach, you kind of know those processes that go through that, let's say in the business world or even on the individual level, and then you start to see the doctors and you see some of these huge gaps that they have. Can you talk us through what are some of the larger ones that you tend to address? You've mentioned communication several times. Seems like they have low empathy also. When you're talking about do they even care? Is that just a compassion thing? How do some of those things really become enlightening to you by being embedded with the doctors compared to just in a normal coaching practice, say?
Mm, mm. Um, well, you mentioned empathy, so perhaps I'll start there. There's some pretty clear, the research is pretty clear that as medical students start to come through med school, as they start to do their placements in second and third year and start to be more in contact with patients, that their empathy decreases. This is a really concerning finding that just as our young people who come into medical school, many of them with, full of idealism and altruism, and they're going to change the world. They really want to help people. And I have met some people who aren't quite fitting that mold, but most medical students come in with these high ideals and good intention. And within a very short time, 2 or 3 years, something has happened to that. And I think this is a really disturbing
Wow.
finding. So, there's something going wrong in the training in that regard, or the expectation of what these young people can bring or provide. And I think we're all responsible for that. It's not only medical school. You go and see your doctor with your problem and you expect that they're going to fix the problem. That's what we ask
Yeah.
of them. So we're all feeding into this culture of the doctor as the fixer, or the doctor who knows everything has the answer. And so empathy is of great concern. We need to do a lot more work, in my view, with medical people, broadly speaking, or probably all health professionals. It's just that I know the research, particularly around medicine. So we want to think about how we're helping doctors be empathic. And a large part of that is, of course, around how they look after themselves. So empathy is complex, and we could spend the whole time talking about empathy. But essentially, empathy is really around feeling in myself what it must be like from your lens. So not reflecting my lens onto you, but really trying to get into your shoes. But there's this cognitive element of understanding from a thinking level what it must be like for you. It's this somatic understanding, getting a knot in my stomach or prickly eyes because I might cry, or a lump in my throat when I'm listening to somebody else's experience. And it's that affective, that emotional element of, this is really sad. And obviously, if I spend all day, 30, 40 people taking on this experience of everybody else, it's a pretty fast road to burnout. And so
Absolutely.
um, what we actually want is more compassion. So we've talked about compassion fatigue for a long time, and really, it's probably, the science is showing us that that's probably not right. We should be talking about empathy fatigue, because
Interesting.
compassion is empathy plus action, is the way I like to think of it. I think that's, most writers talk about compassion as empathy plus action. So
Hmm.
if we can be helping doctors think about, okay, so we want to be really empathic, we want to be in the present, in the moment, understanding from the person's lens what the world looks and feels like, what this experience is like, and we want to take some kind of action. So a doctor would say, of course I'm taking action. I'm, writing a script, or I'm ordering a test, or I'm giving some sort of treatment. But for the doctor themselves, the action needs to be more perhaps simple, in terms of understanding that my action is listening, or being present, or taking care, or seeking to understand, or being curious. And if I can talk to myself about that's the kind of valuable action I bring, then I'm in a compassionate place. And the important thing neurologically about that is that when I'm being compassionate, I'm activating my reward center in my brain. And when I'm just being empathic, I'm activating the pain centers of my brain. Now, if I activate the pain centers of my brain all day long at work, then I'm going to have a lot of emotional labor, and I'm going to be very tired and kind of bogged down in the mud with all the heartbreak and suffering that there is in healthcare. If I can be operating from this place of compassion, then I can feel the sense of reward, the sense of helpfulness, of relieving of suffering. It's got a much more sustainable kind of energy about it, neurologically, and just in my body. So I think that's one of the really key things to help doctors understand that what they bring as a human being in terms of human connection is incredibly valuable and powerful. And the science is fantastic. And we have so many modern day miracles from the science of medicine. So it's not about ignoring that, but it is about helping doctors in a way bring their whole self to their practice, and not to minimize the impact and the power of this compassionate healing relationship. And I think that's the big change we want to see in healthcare.
That's just amazing. I mean, like that's just a subject upon itself. It's just amazing. And if you just can think about, I think everybody puts themselves in that place at some point, even if it's going in for your yearly checkup. You do hang on a doctor's every word. You watch their actions. You're looking at their body language. I mean, there's so much pressure on the doctor from a patient point of view to like tell me what I want to hear, or if you're going to tell me what I don't want to hear, you better be right, and just all of those things. So I can just imagine this wall of pressure and the significant difference for what we're asking. Do not be a robot. Don't be overly empathetic, because you then are going to burn out, like you said, and really embrace and understand the power of compassion. That's
So,
That's
so I
awesome.
think that
That's
that's a thank you. I think that the science is amazing. People who are looking at this difference between the pain, the neuronal pain networks, and the reward center compassion networks. It's extraordinary science, really exciting. But I think the other thing that we do in coaching is the doctors, for a start, get to experience somebody really listening to them. And for many of them, that's a brand new experience. I saw some research last week, which I'm sorry I can't remember the authors, but that was saying that 80% of medical students in America have had an experience of humiliation during their training. And we think of this as, oh, this doesn't happen anymore. This certainly happens. It's a very common experience in medicine. And I haven't studied other careers like I have studied the pathway to being a doctor, of course, but I can't, it's hard to think of other professions that grow up their trainees by so much public humiliation. So
wow. Yeah.
doctors come around in groups to beds in hospitals and learn about patients, and I could talk a whole other podcast about what that experience might be like for patients. But let's just think
Yeah.
about the doctors for this time. So doctors are being trained in groups in public, and they're being tested and assessed in public, where their peers that they might be in competition for a job for are standing beside them, and there's seniors who have the power to recommend or write references and so on for them are also standing there some of the time. All these people witnessing what they know and what they don't know. It's terrifying, and so to say I don't know in that circumstance or to get it wrong is could be career ending in the at least in the doctor's mind. Now, I think
Right.
it's probably not as dramatic as often as they think it is. But the thing to notice is the feeling, that feeling for the young or the progressive, the doctor who's trying to progress their understanding or their career. Now, there is a place, of course, for public learning and sharing, but that happens, as I said before, where there's high trust and respect, and that's not the experience for a lot of doctors as they learn to be doctors. And that's the insight for me that's been, I guess, that where I've come to have more empathy and more understanding, because go back to when I was having my journey with Tim, our experiences then, it was just, what is wrong with these doctors? And so that's an
Yeah.
incredibly unfair assessment of their situation.
You mentioned something early on in our conversation that, in particular, the Western mindset. Have you done any research into how doctors are developed in an Eastern society, in an Eastern mindset, or even potentially if it's a more religious based medical facility or something like that? Are there differences in how doctors are developed because of the cultural mindsets and the aggressiveness that we are in the West?
I don't feel very well qualified to comment. I'm sure that some others can say more than I can with more deeper understanding. But I did read something recently around that some of these problems that we're having of burnout in the Western world of doctor burnout is also happening in China. I don't know enough about that yet, but I'm very curious about that. I think this is a very interesting question. More broadly, we would talk about Eastern cultures have often have built in natural practice from their families of being still, and more the
Yeah.
contemplative practices. But I'm even wary about saying that, Jim, because every religion around the world through history has some kind of contemplative practice. And so I think it's uh,
True.
silly of me to try and make a generalized comment about all of those, that history and culture. But I think definitely, if we look at the Asian people who come to Australia and to America and England to learn to be doctors, they're very driven. They have very high
Yes.
family expectation that they will become a doctor. And some of those people that have been my clients for coaching say, I became a doctor because that's what my father expected of me. So I think there's nuance and complexity, isn't there? There's this they may well have more understanding of mindfulness or more slow habits of bringing some pauses into their day because of cultural training or background, but they may also have significant pressure because of things that are required in the family. So, hard question to answer.
Yes, and you're exactly right. I mean, I absolutely understand the scenarios that you just talked about. I totally agree, and what an interesting dynamic for sure. Have you discovered, are there places that are starting to get this right? Because I'm thinking about the best medical schools in the world and all that, and the high competitiveness, and it's dog eat dog, at least from the outside, right? This is just an outside observation, and just that climb to be the best, like you talk
Yeah.
about. Are there places that are starting to understand and truly embrace that, to optimize, to get truly the greatest high performing organization, even if just in the medical field, they have to change the way that they have been practicing in the past? Are there some places that are coming to this
Oh,
awakening?
absolutely. Yes, there are. I think the Cleveland Clinic and the Mayo Clinic in America, there's some really interesting work going on at Stanford. And there's a researcher, Dr. Tate Sharnefelt, who's done some really interesting work at the Mayo Clinic and is now working at Stanford. And it's a multi-layered problem. Christina Maslach, who's done research for decades into burnout, is of course significant in our understanding as well. So, yes, there's a lot of good work. The work is two. There's two kind of big groups, I guess, pieces of work. One is around the leadership of healthcare, and particularly, and I notice my own bias in this, the leadership of doctors. So it's understanding that doctors do lead teams and they do need training in leadership. It's not something, as you well know, that can just happen by osmosis. It's so kind of accidental, if that's how we're going to train people, that some people are lucky and happen to work with somebody who's an incredible leader. The rest of us, just muddle along making mistakes. So, so,
It's
so
true.
we need to put some investment into helping doctors learn to be leaders. I think this. Listened to Jack Cochran last week speaking. He was at Kaiser Parmenter, and for many years, he's retired now, but he says that it took him a decade or more to learn how to train to be a doctor, and that people knew what he knew and he knew what he knew because of all this rigorous assessment that goes on. But to learn to be a leader, it was just in time. At the last minute, and he was considered ready to be a leader after 2 years of this sort of accidental cobbling together of bits and pieces that he could learn. So we need to really recognise that the leadership is creating the culture and the environment. They have the most power in terms of um, activating culture and creating more of what we want and less of what we don't want. So so,
Amen. Yeah.
so that's so that's that's one piece, and then the other piece is this individual resilience. So doctors are very resilient people. They don't get through their medical training from being not being resilient. So they sometimes get insulted. They're a bit the R word. You've got to be careful about using the R word when you're talking to doctors. But we do want to look at individual skill. We can't wait for cultures of health, big complex health cultures to change before we can look after doctors properly. So we need to spend that individual skill building, helping doctors learn to have mindfulness, to understand the practice of gratitude and the impact that that can have on their well-being. To work with emergency doctors who say they can't leave the floor for 12 hours and so they don't take a drink hardly at all because they don't want to go to the toilet. Well, those doctors who are dehydrated and underfed and fatigued, I don't want those people to be my doctor. They're got
That's right. Exactly
they're going
right.
to make medical errors. Medical errors in America is the third leading cause of death. So we've got to really work hard with our doctors to understand that they need to take better care of themselves, and what does that mean? And we need to work hard on their mind skills, how to manage their minds, and how to regulate. Excuse me. Speaking of regulation, how to regulate their bodies a little bit better, and how to ask for help is a really important skill that we need doctors to learn, how to ask for help. But all of those independent and individual skills can only be really effective if we're also working with the leadership and the culture. So those are the two places we've got to keep paying a lot of attention and invest our time and our money in.
And I would argue that is even beyond the world of doctors. That if you look at
Mm-hmm.
any organization where people are sub optimized, it's these small things. Reminding somebody to take a drink of water, about how that can actually defog you, clear your mind, make you a sharper thinker.
Yeah.
It's amazing how many people have a lack of sleep. You go into a corporate board and they're like, "Why are we not performing like we should?" And you ask them, "When's the last time they took a sleep survey? When did they have a sleep study done amongst all the senior decision makers?" And come to find out, they're acting like they're half
Yeah.
drunk because they don't have
Yeah.
sleep.
Yeah.
They're not properly rested. All of those kind of things. It's amazing.
And that's really the place of mindfulness, Jim. I mean, if I can be really present, then I can make better choices. And so if I can stabilize myself, it might be that I just have a practice of two nice, long, slow, deep breaths. I think you had Mark Meddy on who was talking about the long exhale.
Yes.
I just
Yes.
couldn't endorse that more. This long exhalation brings your heart rate down, brings your blood pressure down, helps you raise your variability, which is an indicator of well-being, of good health. So, these practices of being able to notice where you are in the world, notice what your body's doing in a moment to moment kind of experience so that you can choose. I need to go home. I actually need to go home and go to bed early tonight. And to have the capacity to follow through on that. So our ability to be compassionate to ourselves and present, mindful of what's happening in our experience, those two things can really change our perception, change the structure of our brain, change our behaviors, and ultimately affect our results.
I love that. That should be a title of one of your books. That's for sure, because it is so true, and it's so frustrating sometimes to get people to embrace this type of thinking. For sure. So, when we were talking about something else that I noticed that I'm curious to ask is, I noticed that you are an iRest trainer. And I'm wondering if you could just spend a few seconds telling us a little bit about that practice and what is it. I know it's very big in the military community here in the United States, and just would like to know for our audience just a little bit more about what is
Mm.
that.
So IREST was founded by Richard Miller, who's an American clinical psychologist, and excuse me. It's a yoga nidra practice. So that's a practice where we are still. Mostly we do the yoga nidra lying down, but we can do it sitting up. And it's a practice of trying to work, starting with our body and our intention, and working through the deeper layers, if you like, working through our emotions down to our beliefs, and coming down to the core of ourselves in the practice. So it's a meditation practice, and it's really about being still and welcoming all of the parts of ourselves. One of the things we say in the Iris Yoga Nidra is that all the messengers are welcome, and a lovely Rumi poem around welcome everybody with tea and cake. So everybody being all the feelings. So not just tolerating, for instance, my frustration with the doctors years ago,
Hmm.
not just tolerating that, but actually welcoming that experience of frustration and being this position of welcoming is really a posture of curiosity. So if I'm able to welcome frustration with a genuine curiosity, then I can learn where is this in my body and what does it have me doing when I have this experience in my body, and what belief is feeding this experience of frustration. So in that example, this belief that the doctors didn't care was creating this frustration in my body. And once I was actually curious about that, to understand where was it in my body, how was it affecting my behavior, how was it limiting what I could see in the world, my perception, then a whole world of other things can open up. So I love this practice of IREST, of really welcoming in frustration in this example, and sitting it down and having tea and cake with it, not just welcoming it in and saying, sit in the corner and be quiet, but actually saying, what are you here to teach me? What is this message? What can I learn from this experience? And it's a very internal sitting with and experiencing. A lot of the military people who are involved with the IREST practices say that they found themselves, they came home. And so if you think of somebody with post-traumatic stress, there's a separation, a fragmenting. Their self is not integrated anymore. And so this practice is really helping people to reintegrate and to open their arms and welcome all of their experiences, the wholeness of themselves. It's just a really beautiful, beautiful practice. And I love being on retreat with the doctors and doing this practice, and they've never experienced it, most of them, before. And it's similar when I have my own learning initially about IREST, and in fact, still now often with an IREST practice, feeling like, wow, just this sense of wholeness. We're so busy, we don't have that feeling often in the busyness of our life. But
For sure.
Richard Miller has a lovely saying that I say to myself often, which is, if you fight with reality, you will lose. And I think this expression of, okay, so what's real here? Not what do I wish for? What did I hope for? What am I remembering? What am I imagining? But what's right here in this moment that I can sit with, be present to, maybe accept, hopefully accept, but really we're not talking about that sort of goal orientation. We're just talking about, can I be present with what's here? And it's a very powerful permission to give people.
I read recently that with functional MRIs, they've been able to detect. They came up with this phrase. It was called "name it and tame it,"
Mhm.
and it's sitting down with tea.
Yeah,
Really, it's if you have this level of frustration, they were able to track in the functional MRI where it was activating a part of your brain. But if you name this frustration, if you have tea with it, if you are actually confronting it and saying it out loud, or even in your head, I guess, but if you were actually naming this frustration, they could watch the blood sugars go to the other side, and you relaxed, you grew, you accepted it. It wasn't actually affecting you like it was originally. It's amazing.
it really is amazing. And if people are interested in this, name it to tame it, you have a look at the acceptance and commitment therapy work. And Stephen Hayes is the main researcher. Uh, he spent decades of his life looking at this stuff, not so much from the neurological position, but the behavioural position. And his most recent book, The Liberated Mind, is a terrific demonstration and walkthrough of this practice. And there's certainly, we can just say it to ourselves. If we're saying it to ourselves, just name it to tame it. Frustration's here. Can I be present with it? That sort of conversation with ourselves, incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
To say it out loud, whether it's say it out loud to the dog, say it out loud to another person, just say it out loud to the air, more powerful. We don't understand, I think, all of the science, but saying things out loud, sharing them out loud in a sensory way. So even writing in our journal, this experience of saying it out loud, as let's call it, of hearing it in our ears, feeling it in our mouth, witnessing it on the paper that's come from our own hand. It's different. We hold that differently in our minds to when we're just ruminating round and round and round in a circle in our minds. So it's a very powerful way to kind of break or achieve this other perspective or this new idea, to say something out loud. I should just preface that with, make sure you do that in a trusted, safe place.
Yeah. Very true. That is a good thing. We don't want everybody listening to this and then just walking out in the middle of the shopping mall and screaming something out. That's true. Well, Shari, I will tell you, you have given us a journey today. This has been unbelievable. I'll be honest with you. I wish this was a 3 hour long podcast because I want more. I I think we've just touched the very top of the surface on so much of your expertise, so much of your wisdom, and truly appreciate what you do for the medical community. I think this is work that is truly needed. I think it's amplified by the fact that of the time that we're in now with COVID, the severe stress that community is under. And I know that everybody is appreciative of the work that you do. I'd love for you to kind of give us your last thoughts before we sign off today. And again, just to say what a privilege it was to have this conversation.
Well, thank you very much, Jim. It's been really a pleasure for me too. So, I guess so much of what happens in healthcare is driven by safety, and it's driven by keeping the patient safe, but it's also about keeping organisations and providers safe in a legal way. And so
Mhm.
I think really we want to come back to, you were talking at the beginning about human centeredness, and really thinking about how can we be getting back to basics, still keeping everybody safe, but recognizing that actually the greatest safety is in the human connection, that sense of trust, that I'm going to. Doctors don't get sued because they do things technically wrong. Often, they get sued because they were, to be
Hmm.
to be frank, in the patient's view. So the patient
You bet.
thinks that the doctor somehow was unfair or rude or didn't treat them well. And so I think coming back to this very basic idea that humans survived, we've survived for millennia because we've looked out for each other and looked after each other and worked together. And so this very basic human acceptance that everybody's doing the best that they can. And if I can look at you and say you're just like me, and you can look at me and say you're just like me, recognizing that we're all seeking happiness, or if you don't like that word, peace or contentment or satisfaction, and we're all seeking to relieve or get away from suffering, and we're all the same um, in that way. And so I think if that's the basis of how we work together, we could probably all travel a long way together.
There's no doubt about it. Sharee, you have made us better for this conversation today. And that human connection across continents is felt, and your time is truly appreciated. Once again, thank you for spending time with this Iron Sharpens Iron movement. It was of value and truly appreciated.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
Thanks for joining our leadership movement this week. Talking to Sharee was a journey into how we have control over ourselves as long as we are intentional in making it happen. It's just an amazing episode. Don't forget our show notes are posted on the website with key leader takeaways, and be sure to subscribe and tell a friend so we can continue to grow this tribe. Until next time, keep remembering that iron sharpens iron. Make yourself and others around you better every single day.